Welcome to another Dr. Sadler's Honest Book Reviews. This is going to be a little bit shorter than my usual fare, in part because the book that I'm reviewing is indeed a much shorter book. It's actually a children's book, The Stock Horse and the Stable Cat by Phil Van Treuren, and it's published by Stoic Simple Press, Fables of Eudaimonia. And that tells you kind of why I'm actually reviewing the text. Normally I don't do children's books, but this one is intended to teach some, let's call it basic principles and application of at least a little bit of Stoic thought and practice for kids. And it was also sent to me by the author himself with the inscription, "Choose to see the good in life." So, it's very nice that it was sent to me. And I'm going to make an exception to my usual focusing on books written by adults for adults and talk a bit about this, The Stock Horse and the Stable Cat. So, I always like to begin every book review with three big S's: style, structure, summary. And so, let's start with style. This is a kid's book, after all, and it is written for children. So, it's rather formulaic in how it is set out. We'll talk about that a bit more as we get into the main ideas of the book. I'll just say that there's sort of a template for how the two main characters, the cat and the horse, relate to each other. And, it's written in easy-to-read language. I'm not sure what grade level this would be associated with, but, any reasonably smart kid should be able to make their way through. It's not complex vocabulary. And I think, the repetition actually would, make it easier for a child to anticipate what's coming next as far as the sentences, the grammar, all of that. One thing that we can say about it that's really a central feature to it is a picture book. And so you can see on the cover right here an image of the aforementioned stock horse and stable cat, who turn out to be friends, by the way. And we see some very interesting depictions of what is going on. And I'll talk a little bit more about these, but I just want to give you a quick vignette of what we're seeing in them. A number of what appear to be, paintings, some a little bit, here's the cover one, a little bit more detail in some than in others. Sometimes human beings and other animals in there as well, like this guy, for example. Lots of nature scenes. Here's another pretty one as well. The structure of it is that it's basically saying the same sort of thing, page after page after page, encounter after encounter, until they get to the final one, which is, a typical kid's book. So, nothing unusual there. And now, what is the summary? Well, here's where we get into a little bit of the content. After we get past two quotations, one from Epictetus and one from William Shakespeare, it's not things that make us feel upset, but our judgments about things, and there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. We find out that a faithful stock horse and a wily stable cat had become unlikely friends at the ranch and found themselves walking together one autumn morning. And then that's the lead up, right? And then here's a sort of sample page. In a meadow behind the paddock, they saw an apple tree and watched as its branches rustled in a breeze. Now the horse is going to have one take. The cat is going to have another. The wind is good, said the stock horse. It carries the smell of sagebrush from the valley and blows through my mane, and that makes me feel happy. The wind is bad, said the stable cat. It's boisterous and bothersome and makes it difficult to hunt mice in the field, and that makes me feel angry. So 2 different takes. But the wind was not good or bad. It was simply the wind, and the horse and cat were free to choose how they felt about it. So there's your kind of summary of what's going on. Many different iterations on that, and there's always going to be some feelings involved. They get to the very end. I suppose I should tell you that it's got a happy ending, or at least a, good ending. They hang out with each other. The horse says, we get to decide for ourselves how things make us feel, and that is good. And the stable cat says, yes, you're right. That's the greatest good of all. And then they part ways. The stock horse turned to walk back to the corral while the stable cat crept silently off into the night. So there's, essentially your summary of what's going on in the book. You could say it's basically like a set of encounters that these 2 animal friends, who seem to, interestingly, have very contrary opinions and takes on so many things, this is how they resolve that seeming conflict. So, main ideas of this work. It is a didactic work intended to help children learn about some basic concepts that you could say are not just coming from Stoicism, but from ancient virtue ethics in general, where people are, in fact, held responsible for the emotions that they have, because emotions have cognitive and judgmental components as well as affective components. You're not going to find any of that language in this book, of course, because it's not written for, academics. It is written for children. And so, as I mentioned, we have a kind of formula that we see in each one. So X is good, either the horse or the cat says, and it's good because of something, and that makes me feel A, right? And then the other one, very predictably, will say, no, X is bad, and it's bad because of this, and that makes me feel B. So there's like a conflict of emotions. There's an interesting 3-part shuffle for each of these. And, it's easy to, I think, wrap your head around for a kid. They can learn the lesson quite quickly that not only are the same things going to be viewed in different ways by different animals and presumably by extension different people, but they're going to have reasons for why they feel that way. Reasons that matter to them, but maybe don't matter to the other person. And that is going to produce feelings on their part, which could be opposed to each other. So, it's quite interesting here if we look at the feeling aspect of it. So we've already seen happy and angry, right? The next set of paired feelings, excited and worried, right? This is about an apple tree. The cat bounded up the trunk of the apple tree and walked out onto a branch. She sat and licked her paw contentedly while the horse looked up at her. High places are good. High places is our X. I can spy on everyone around me from up here, and that makes me feel excited. High places are bad, said the stock horse. You could hurt yourself if you fell from there, and that makes me feel worried, right? So we've got excited, worried. We've got an apple. Apples make the horse feel delighted, make the cat feel disgusted. We've got a hollow log, which is a narrow space. It makes the cat feel safe. The horse likes being in the open. Being cooped up makes the horse feel nervous. The pond they encounter makes the horse feel glad. It makes the cat feel upset because it imagines falling into the water. They see the rancher's wife with goats, and the cat likes the goats. It makes the cat feel cheerful. The goats, the horse isn't so into them. The horse feels offended. Then they see a rancher doing hard work. The stock horse likes that. It makes him feel proud. The cat hard work makes the cat feel annoyed. We get to rain and being alone, and the cat likes being alone and makes the cat feel free. The horse feels lonesome instead. We get to the ranch dog, who the horse feels grateful to, and the cat instead feels anxious. We go a little bit further, and it is night. Night makes the cat feel adventurous. Night makes the horse feel frightened. And that's basically it until we get to the end, where we'll talk about that in just a moment. So you see the pattern there, right? There's a thing, they feel different ways about it, and there's another part of the formula. Whatever it is not good or bad, it simply is that thing, and the horse and cat were free to choose how they felt about it. Now, that's an interesting contention. We'll talk about that in a moment. I do want to talk about the very last set of points that are being made here. So, this ties directly into that. The horse is saying, we get to decide how things make us feel. That's good. The stable cat thinks about that. That's the greatest good of all. So there's a claim being made, It's not being critically assessed or anything like that, because again, children's book, right? But something is being put on the table as a main set of points for understanding how we should look at things in life and how we should understand the disagreements that we're going to have with other people about those very same things. Where do they come from? It's the way in which we choose to look at things. So this is a book that's intended to, enable children to come out of, let's call it, being stuck with their feelings, being stuck with their mindsets, and offering them the insight that we are, at least to some degree, free to choose how we look at things, and then that causes us to feel certain ways. So what are the good points about the book? I think that Van Treuren is, a good descriptive writer. I think it can be quite difficult to write in ways that are not generic, that convey, the imagery of what's going on, that capture, in this case, the character of a cat and a horse well. And I think that Van Treuren has actually succeeded in that. I'll just give you a few examples, right? So the sun climbed higher in the sky as the horse and cat passed through the meadow. Nice descriptive language there. They stopped at the edge of a small pond, and the horse looked down at the mountains reflected in the shallow water, right? Well, that's quite a vignette there, isn't it? You could kind of linger over that and imagine it in your mind. And this leads me to the second main thing that I really do like about this book. I really like the illustrations or paintings, including, the cover one right here, which is associated with that particular description of the, horse looking down and seeing the mountains in the water. Art is rather subjective. I really do like this sort of style, rich, robust use of color and light, kind of impressionistic in parts. I mean, check out this cat and the tree, and then the, background, right? It's not fully filled in, but I like that sort of thing myself. Here's another one of the cat that I particularly like. With the hollow log, that's a narrow space, right? So I really like these, and here's a great one, right? They're anticipating the night where the cat is going to feel adventurous, watching the sun go down together. So yeah, it's some great artwork, and I think the story reads quite well. I could imagine this being a bedtime story for some child and getting read over and over and over again. So, yeah, a few good things to say about this. Was there anything that I found problematic about the book? I mean, the first time that I read it, I thought, oh man, this is really repetitious and didactic. And then, I reread it and also reminded myself that this is a children's book. This is not written for adults or even teenagers. This is written for young kids. And the more times that I read it through, the less problematic I found the repetition of structure and verbiage and, the rather formulaic way it's arranged. I think actually that turns out to be one of the strengths of the book. My only real concern is something that comes not from within the book, but actually the back jacket, where it's got this, what does Stoic mean anyway? And it says, Stoicism is just a way of looking at the world that makes you happier. It sounds simple because it is. Stoic people try to focus only on good emotions and accept the stuff they can't change. They believe every situation has a silver lining, and they try to be perfectly content with what they already have. Now, the last two things, those are quite correct. Some of these things are oversimplifications or actually quite wrong about Stoicism. Stoics don't just focus on good emotions. They also focus on the bad emotions, which is why they have an entire theory about it, and they don't just ignore them. They look at them and try to figure out why they feel the way that they do so that they can eventually feel less of those. They don't just only focus on good emotions, and so that's misleading. Stoicism is not just a way of looking at the world that makes you happier. That sounds simple because it is. Stoicism is actually a complex, very robust, systematic philosophy with lots of practices and insights. And I think telling kids that it's just a simple way of looking at things is misleading. How misleading? Not terribly, because if they're interested in Stoicism, they can go so many places and quickly find out that it's not just so simple a thing. I get that, it's Stoic Simple Press, and Phil Van Treuren is like super into stoicsimple.com, but that's a whole other conversation. I think it's problematic to make Stoicism simpler than it is. It's sort of like Occam's razor doesn't say the simplest thing is the best. Occam's razor says don't multiply entities beyond necessity. So if you need 29 explanatory principles to actually explain something properly, you don't reduce it to 4 just because that's more convenient. So that's my only real beef with the book. At first I kind of balked looking at the price, but apparently for a hardcover children's book with lots of illustrations, it's a normal price range for it. And that's all I've got to say about it being problematic. So, final thoughts on The Stock Horse and the Stable Cat by Phil Van Treuren. I like it. I think it's quite good. I will try to think about who I can give this to as a nice present who's of an age that would appreciate it, because my kids are much too old for this sort of thing. But I think it's a good children's book. It's a nice gateway into a complex, rich, very helpful philosophy as a way of life that we call Stoicism. It's a nice allegory for teaching it, and it was very nice that Phil sent me this copy of his book to take a look over and to pass on to somebody else who might appreciate it more. Maybe they'll pass it on over and over and over again. So that's it for this very short review of The Stock Horse and the Stable Cat.